So, have you ever faced challenges in life that just felt, well, overwhelming?
Definitely.
You know, the kind of suffering that seems to have no rhyme or reason, or that deep ache of loss, or even relationships that feel just impossibly stuck.
Yeah, and it's natural to ask, why? Right?
Yeah.
Why me? What's the point of this?
Exactly. Well, okay, let's unpack this a bit, because we're about to dive into a perspective that offers a pretty radical way to view these very things. This deep dive looks at the spiritual side of our journey, the profound influence of our past, not just last week's past, maybe much, much further back.
Yeah, potentially lifetimes back, according to this view.
And we'll explore what real, lasting self-renewal might actually involve.
And we're drawing heavily from a talk by Haroldo Dutra Dias. He references a really significant spiritual work, EntreATerraEOCeu.
Right.
And these sources, they give us a kind of framework for understanding the, let's say, unseen forces, and importantly, the internal states that they suggest actively shape our reality.
So our mission here is really to pull out the key nuggets, the most important bits from these sources.
Yeah, sort of a shortcut.
A shortcut, exactly, to help you understand what might be going on beneath the surface of your own experiences according to this perspective, and maybe see a path to genuine change.
And it all starts really by widening our lens quite a bit, expanding how we even view life itself.
Yeah, right away, the source material challenges that, typical idea of life just being cradled to tomb, done. It brings in the spiritist idea, which, for context, is a spiritual philosophy from the 19th century, that this physical life, it's just one chapter.
Precisely. It frames birth and death not as the absolute start and finish, but more like temporary stations.
Russians on a journey.
Exactly. Stations in a much, much bigger, eternal journey of an immortal spirit. So, from this viewpoint, we've been traveling for a long time, seen many stations.
And thinking that way, adopting that bigger view, it's not just academic, is it? The sources say it brings a much greater sense of responsibility.
Oh, absolutely. Because if this life is just one stop on this long evolutionary road, then how you live this life really matters for the rest of the journey. It profoundly impacts it. The material talks about being awake, conscious while we're here in the body.
Right, choosing awareness over what it calls the sleep of the flesh.
Preferring that awareness of these deeper realities.
But even if we're trying to be awake, we carry stuff with us, right? Patterns. And the source brings up this idea it calls mental crystallization. What does that mean exactly?
Well, think of it like the mind getting stuck. Becoming rigid, fixated on certain experiences or emotional wounds or even specific ways of behaving.
Okay.
And according to this perspective, these fixations can be incredibly strong. So strong they can persist, maybe even carry their influence across different lifetimes.
Wow. The examples in the source are pretty intense, too. It mentions fixations from things like, say, being murdered in a past experience.
Yeah, deep trauma.
Or that profound feeling of abandonment in a relationship, or being financially betrayed by someone you trusted. These kinds of deep hurts, if they're not healed, can crystallize.
And here's a really critical point the source makes. It acknowledges that intellectual development, learning things, cultural pursuits, that's all valuable. It civilizes us, opens the mind.
Sure, education is good.
Right. But the material insists it's fundamentally not enough to resolve these really deep-seated emotional and spiritual knots.
So learning more, reading more, that doesn't fix the core stuff.
Not these kinds of core issues, according to the source. And this is where it gets really interesting. The source argues that the real problems, the ones causing the most anguish, the repeating patterns, the deep suffering, they're what it calls the old problems of sentiment.
Sentiment, meaning feeling.
Exactly. Love, hate, sympathy, and that Portuguese word, desafeto, which is like a deep antipathy, aversion, or dislike. These core emotional energies are things that just thinking intellectually about them doesn't untangle.
And that ties right into what it says about society, doesn't it? Where we put our focus. We spend so much energy preparing people for the outside world.
Just look around, right? The huge emphasis on physical health, getting the best education possible, climbing the career ladder, becoming financially independent.
Yeah, we train people to function well outwardly.
But the source asks this really provocative question. Why don't we put that same kind of effort into teaching people how to handle being wronged without just drowning in resentment?
Right. Or how to face frustration with some kind of serenity.
Or how to get a handle on our own desires so they don't just lead us into constant trouble or torment.
It really highlights this massive gap, doesn't it? What it calls the neglected education. the education of our feelings, our moral core.
Yeah, the systematic development of our inner world.
And this perspective basically says that's the real point. That's why we're here, to form spirits, to cultivate who we are inside, not just to create people who look successful by today's standards.
Which naturally leads us to the power that resides within that inner being.
Yeah. Speaking of desires, the Source puts forward this incredibly powerful, almost startling statement. Every desire is a fountain of power.
It's a huge concept. It points to this immense creative force that we all have inside us. The Source basically says that anything you truly, deeply, persistently desire, it will eventually come to you. It really emphasizes the active, inherent power in desire itself.
But it's not all sunshine and rainbows, is it? There's a catch.
No, definitely not. There's a big caution sign right there. The Source points out that many of our desires aren't actually good for us. In fact, many become a source of torment.
Like wanting things that ultimately make us miserable.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here, the material suggests that for real spiritual growth, the hardest thing isn't always changing someone's difficult situation on the outside. Often, the truly challenging task is helping them stop wanting that difficult situation on some deep inner level. Maybe finding a strange kind of comfort or familiarity.
Yes. Or even an identity.
Yeah. An identity wrapped up in, say, depression or anger or feeling like a victim. Letting go of the desire for that state can be harder than changing the circumstances.
Okay, so how does that work then? How do these inner desires, these deep patterns, actually shape our external reality? What's the mechanism?
Well, the Source talks about a fundamental divine law, a universal mechanism. It's described as coming from a divine source. And it acts through, well, countless beings at all different stages of evolution.
Like a cosmic system?
Kind of, from basic instinctual drives through intelligence, human reason, all the way up to what it calls angelitude. These are seen as the agents carrying out this law throughout the universe.
And this law, it's responding directly to us, to our inner state.
Precisely. According to this view, every deep-seated desire you hold, every persistent anxiety, every core fixation or yearning, it finds a reaction from life itself. And that reaction is of an absolutely similar nature.
So not random chance.
Not at all. It's a reflection, a mirroring based on this law.
Okay, so as I'm tracking this law implies that we're basically like spiritual transmitters and receivers.
That's a great way to put it. Exactly. Based on that principle of like attracting like.
Right.
Your dominant thoughts, your core feelings, your strongest desires, all that stuff together creates your, you could call it spiritual frequency.
You're putting out a signal.
Constantly. And that inner frequency, that signal you're broadcasting, it determines the kind of spiritual company, the energies, and even the experiences you attract into your life, both seen and unseen. Your internal state is the magnet.
Wow. Okay, so this idea that our inner world, maybe shaped by these old patterns, attracts our experiences. It definitely makes you look at challenges like suffering or illness differently. Which actually brings us to something surprising the Source mentions. The idea that forgetting past lives is a gift.
That's right. It's not seen as just like spiritual amnesia to block out pain, though it probably helps with that too.
Yeah.
It's described as the greatest invitation from God for renewal, for a truly fresh start.
Because if you remembered every single mistake, every trauma,
it would be incredibly hard to move forward, wouldn't it? To truly change. The Source is very firm on this. You are better now than you were before.
That's encouraging.
It is. Spiritual evolution is real, it says, and you can't really go backward. So the most important version of you isn't some past life figure, it's who you are today. Because today is your current stage of growth.
And this connects directly to having children, doesn't it?
Yes, profoundly. The Source views welcoming a child not just as a new biological life, but as welcoming an ancient spirit starting over in a new body.
Wow.
It's presented as this constant living invitation to renewal for everyone involved. Think about it. The child learning everything again. Walking, talking, relating to the world without all our ingrained adult habits.
Yeah, it's like a blank slate. In a way.
It serves as this powerful model for us, the adults, to maybe shed our old patterns and try doing things differently too.
So this puts a lot of weight on anyone in a position of influence, like parents, right? Are we, maybe without realizing it, just reinforcing those old crystallizations in these spirits?
Or are we actively helping them renew, acting as agents of that potential for change.
It totally shifts the focus, doesn't it? It's not just about teaching kids how to get by in the world.
No, it's about supporting that ancient spirit in letting go of its old baggage and truly embracing the growth this new life offers.
The Source also really tackles those tough questions head on. About suffering, why some lives end early, why illness happens. It looks at them through this lens of the soul's journey in purification.
Right. It introduces this complex idea that physical issues, the origins of disease, it uses the term pathogenia, are deeply connected to the spiritual body, the perispirit.
The perispirit. Okay, you mentioned that before. Can you explain that a bit more? What is it, according to this source?
So think of the perispirit, or spiritual body, as like the energetic interface. It's the link between the immortal spirit and the physical body we inhabit now. And the source describes it as recording everything. Every action, every emotion, every single thought gets imprinted on it, like a detailed energetic photograph.
Like a spiritual hard drive.
Kind of, yeah. And because it records everything, it becomes magnetic. It becomes a magnet.
A magnet for experiences.
Exactly. We attract good things based on what the source calls titles of work acquired. That's basically the positive stuff, the lessons learned, the growth achieved, the good deeds done over time.
Or spiritual credits, maybe?
You could say that. And we attract the difficult stuff, the unpleasant outcomes, based on our needs of redemption.
So the unresolved patterns, the crystallizations, the stuff needing purification.
Precisely. The energetic residues that need clearing or balancing. And the source insists this isn't random. It calls it absolute synchrony. Things line up perfectly based on this magnetic attraction.
Okay, so now connect that back to physical illness. How does that fit in?
Yes. So the idea presented is, well, it's quite profound. It suggests the physical body, under certain conditions, can act like miraculous coal.
Miraculous coal.
Yeah, meaning it has this capacity to actually absorb energetic toxins and residues of shadow that have built up in that spiritual body, the perispirit.
So the physical body takes the hit, in a way.
As part of a purification process, yes. The physical suffering, the illness, becomes, from this perspective, a mechanism, sometimes painful, yes, but a necessary one for spiritual cleansing. The body literally works to absorb and process those older negative energies.
Wow. That really makes you think, could the difficulties, maybe even the physical problems you're facing right now, actually be part of your soul's cleanup crew?
Mm-hmm.
A deep cleanse happening through the body itself.
It's a challenging idea, for sure. But within this framework, it offers a potential layer of meaning to suffering that goes beyond just randomness or bad luck.
And it completely reframes how we might look at life and death, too.
It really does. If you shift your perspective, try to look at it from the spiritual plane, from the after-the-tomb side, then earthly life and physical death are just temporary excursions.
Like trips abroad.
Kind of. Trips with guaranteed return tickets. Everyone eventually leaves the physical body, and everyone eventually takes on a new one. That's the cycle.
So the critical thing isn't when you make that return trip, when you disincarnate.
Exactly. That's not the main point. The source hammers this home. The fundamental question is how you return.
How you return, meaning?
Will you go back to the spiritual dimension more purified than when you arrived here? Will you have gained greater dominion over self?
Dominion over self. That feels like the exact opposite of what society often pushes, which is dominion over others or over circumstances.
It really is. This self-mastery, gaining conscious control over your own desires, your turbulent emotions, your automatic reactive thoughts, that is presented as the true goal of moral education. It's what the source calls the evangelization of the heart. Cultivating genuine Christian sentiments, not necessarily tied to one specific religion, but embodying that inner code, love, compassion, forgiveness, humility.
Rather than focusing on external power or control.
Which this perspective clearly sees as a major detour from real spiritual progress.
But just to be clear, even with all this focus on the spiritual, the source isn't saying earthly life or material things are unimportant or bad, is it?
Oh, not at all. It's very clear on that. Earthly resources, your body, your job, your home, relationships, money, they aren't meant to be devalued. That would be ungrateful, actually.
Okay.
They are seen as crucial, necessary, purposeful tools given to us specifically for our spiritual growth and purification while we are here.
And that idea about desire being power loops back in here, too.
Yes, absolutely. Because true access to what it calls universal wealth, which is way bigger than just money, that comes from educating your desires, learning to align what you truly want deep down with these higher principles of spiritual growth and divine law.
So evangelization of the heart, It's not just about religious lessons then.
No, fundamentally, it's about educating our emotions, training our feelings, and that leads to what the Source beautifully calls beauty of the soul.
Beauty of the...
Which means cultivating those inner qualities. Fraternity, genuine empathy, simplicity, the capacity for forgiveness. That's where the divine moral code is meant to live. Not written in a book somewhere, but alive inside you.
And people in those influential roles we talked about, especially parents, they have a unique part to play in this. Almost sacred.
According to the Source, yes. They are seen as chosen in a way because they have a particular spiritual connection, a resonance needed to help certain souls renew themselves.
Like they're matched up.
Exactly. They're there to help magnetize the soul in their care towards its highest potential. To act as, and this is a lovely phrase, transformers of divinity.
Transformers of divinity.
Reflecting divine light, divine love, to aid the spiritual growth of those souls entrusted to them.
That's a really profound way to think about raising kids or mentoring someone.
Yeah.
So, okay, as we start to wrap up this deep dive, it feels like these sources offer a really powerful, sometimes challenging, but ultimately, I think, hopeful perspective. Life isn't just this one shot. It's this vast, eternal journey of the spirit.
Yeah. And our experiences here on Earth, even the really hard ones, aren't random. They're deeply shaped by our inner world, those ingrained mental crystallizations and the